Why, hello there, everyone, and welcome back to the GSL-English podcast. My name is, of course, Gideon, and as you can see from this beautiful backdrop, if you are watching on YouTube, I am still in the Dominican Republic. And you can tell by my holiday hat and my sunglasses, I am fully in holiday mode. Yeah, it's activated. Holiday Gideon is here. Is activated. So we're going to have a nice and relaxed podcast together today. We're actually no, it's not going to be that relaxed because we're going to read a story about survival today. Okay, so spent a lot of time looking at the ocean. So just in case you were listening on Spotify, just to describe the view, we have some greenery and then ocean in the background. And well, the ocean is an incredible thing, isn't it? So I've spent a lot of time looking at it, thinking, and wondering. And then I came across a survival story that I thought we could go through today. So the story is entitled, Meet the Man Who Survived 16 plus hours at sea after his boat capsized. Okay? So yeah, although we have this extremely relaxing view, the story that we are going to read together is actually quite tense. Now, this is a true story taken from Reader's Digest. So what we're going to do in a moment once we get started is we're actually just going to take it paragraph by paragraph. And then after each paragraph, we're just going to summarize what has happened, look at some of the vocabulary, and just talk about it a little bit. So just before we get into this, if you haven't done so already, please do check out my podcast from last week with Ash from Ash_British English. We had a lovely chat together, so don't forget to say hi in the comments. Give that a watch or a listen on Spotify. And just as another note, if there is any wind noise in this podcast, I do apologise. I am outside, so I will try and edit it out as much as possible, but my skills are very limited, as many of you know. So we'll see what we can do. So yes, we're going to get into the story today. Meet the man who survived 16 plus hours at sea after his boat capsized. So this story really interested me. It is quite tense. So as we go through, I want to see what you think. But as always, as we go through, try to understand and get the point of the story. Try and listen out for new vocabulary, sentence structures. If you are watching on YouTube, I do encourage you to follow along as I read. If you would like to, a great exercise is to pause and then repeat after me each paragraph. But yeah, just do whatever you want. But, if possible, let's try and learn something new and improve our English together. So let's take the first paragraph here, just as an introduction. Laurent Camprubi is about 15 miles off the coast of northwestern Spain, hoisting the mainsail on the deck of the 39-foot sailboat Jeanne. Ever since he left Lisbon, Portugal, the day before, he has been fighting the elements, but he is in his element too. Okay, so here we are introduced to the main character, or the main person in this true story, Laurent Camprubi, and as we go through, he is just identified as Camprubi. So it sets the scene here that he's off the coast, northwestern Spain. He's hoisting the mainsail, so putting up the mainsail on the deck of the 39-foot sailboat. So a sailboat is a boat that is primarily driven by the winds in the sails. And it says that he has been fighting the elements. So the wind and everything like that has been fighting against him. So it's been quite challenging. But in reverse, it says that he is in his element too. And if somebody is in their elements, they're in their perfect environment, doing something that they love. That's an interesting play on words, that although he has been fighting the elements, so fighting against the wind and the waves and the storm, he is in his element, meaning that he's just simply loving it. Camprubi is aiming to qualify for the Route du Rhum, a 4,077-mile race held every 4 years from Saint-Malo in France to Guadeloupe, a group of islands in the Caribbean. On a night that's anything but calm, The solo athlete is tacking, adjusting to ensure that the vessel gets to its destination of Cherbourg, France, about 1,050 miles to the northeast. Now, just as a little disclaimer here, I already know I'm butchering the pronunciation of some of these places, so if you are French, I can only but apologise. I did try looking them up, but I've forgotten them all already, so you can tell me how they're supposed to be. So yeah, we get the idea here that he's trying to qualify for another race. Now, if you are qualifying for a race, it means that you are participating in a way that means that you can enter the full race. So he's doing a qualification race for a pretty big race that's held every 4 years. 4,077 miles. And it describes it, this night is anything but calm. And he is a solo athlete, meaning that he's on his own. And it says that he is tacking the boat, and that means changing direction. So moving the sail so he can change direction. He's adjusting to get to his destination. So you get the idea that it's not easy conditions for Camprubi. You know, he's fighting it, but he's loving it at the moment. We'll read on. After more than 12 hours of sailing, Camprubi decides to take a much-needed break. While a beacon automatically broadcasts his position to route de Rhum, organisers every 15 minutes, the waves batter the Xi'an in a language all their own. Screams, whistles, crashes, roars. Okay, so 12 hours of sailing must be absolutely tight, shattered, so he decides to take a much-needed break. But it says here that while he is sleeping, there's a beacon automatically broadcasting his position to the organisers. So they don't need to worry about him. He knows that wherever he goes, his position will be sent to the organisers of this race so they can keep track of him. But it's interesting, it says, you know, the waves are battering the Xi'an. They're battering the boat, almost in their old language. And if you've ever been out at sea in a storm, the noise is incredible. Of all the waves crashing against the boat, the wind roaring around it. It's quite intimidating. We'll read on. He knows that in the distance is the craggy peninsula Cape Finisterre, or end of the world. But 6 to 10 foot waves have turned his surroundings into a uniform dark grey. So he knows that he's got this craggy, rocky peninsula ahead, which has the very daunting title called End of the World. But not only does he know that's coming, he's also fighting 6 to 10 foot waves, so his surroundings are simply just dark grey. He can't see what's coming up. So that creates another test. So the next paragraph, a test of strength and perseverance. Tall and lanky, the 62-year-old has been sailing since his 20s and is eager to tackle the route de Rhum, which he considers the Everest of sailing. A stylist for a Portugal-based fashion footwear company, Camprubi lives with his partner, Virginie Philippe, and their 2 children in Marseille, where he has been training for months. So it calls him tall and lanky. Basically, he's very tall and quite skinny, but 62 years old. And for him, this race it describes it as the Everest of sailing. Now, for many mountain climbers, climbing Everest is their ultimate goal, isn't it? It's their achievement. It's the pinnacle of what they do. So this, for him, this race is his Everest, so to speak. So he's from Marseille, but he knows what he's doing. He's an experienced sailor, but he's been training for this. The race would be a test of strength and perseverance, and Camprubi, a lifelong cyclist and runner, has also been doing weight training to build his core muscles so that he will be better able to keep his balance in rough seas. And tonight, it is indeed rough. So it says here there's going to be a test of strength and perseverance. So, of course, strength being his physical and mental strength, but perseverance is that quality of keeping on going, not giving up, of continuing through it. So he's been training a lot. It says that he's been weight training, so lifting weights to build his muscle, but also strengthening his core muscles, his abs, that central point to really deal with the rough seas. And when we describe the sea as rough, it's anything but calm. As Kamprubi lies in the cockpit, resting, a wave crashes into the boat, which suddenly slows down. Opening his eyes, Kamprubi sees the boat beginning to list to one side, and he knows what has happened. He has lost the keel, the weighted fin that runs along the bottom of the boat to keep it upright. The Xi'an is capsizing. Okay, so big wave crashes onto the boat, and now the boat just starts leaning to one side. And what has happened is along the bottom of the boat, there's a weighted fin, the keel. That's been damaged, so now the Xi'an is capsizing, which if you're watching on YouTube, you can see an image, but it means that the boat is basically going under, turning over at sea. So yes, not a good situation. You have 15 seconds to get below deck before the boat flips over, he tells himself. Your life depends on it. Move. Once below, he attempts to close the door, but water keeps rushing in, making the task impossible. The Xi'an violently flips upside down, bobbing in the waves. Kamprubi has been thrown to the ceiling and is crouched there, on what is now his floor. His prescription eyeglasses are smashed, as are the computer and other electronics, and the pieces are floating in seawater. Okay, so he wasn't able to control it. The boat has now flipped over. And can you just imagine yourself in this situation? You've got, crashing waves. The sea is rough. Your boat is now upside down. So what he is sitting on would be the roof of that cockpit area. Not only that, his electronics, everything he needs is smashed. But the bit that would freak me out the most is that this is an American article, so they call it eyeglasses. In British English, we just call it glasses. They're smashed. And they're prescription, meaning that they are specifically designed for his eyes. Prescription is your own prescription, what you need. So that creates a massive problem. So just at this point, try and imagine yourself in that situation. What would you do? What kind of personality do you have? At this point, would you give up and think, well, this is it? Or are you the kind of person that would keep on fighting? As we go through, put yourself in Kamprubi's shoes. He ventures farther into the boat to retrieve his survival kit, then returns to what he judges to be the safest spot by the door. Almost 20 minutes after capsizing, he sets off his SOS signal and grabs his bright red survival suit. Okay, so now he's found his safe spot by the door. It's been 20 minutes now since capsizing. He seems to be keeping it together, so he sets off his SOS signal, the signal that, whether that's a flare or whether that's another beacon that goes to the organisers, basically saying, I'm in trouble, I need help. So he grabs his survival suit. Made of waterproof neoprene, it's a bulky, stiff onesie, complete with hood and attached booties. Booties? Or boots? Don't know why they've called them booties. That's a really strange way of wording that. I would say, and attached boots. But anyway, he knows that adrenaline is still keeping him warm. But once it wears off, the suit is the best defence whilst waiting for whatever help might come. Okay, so now he's got this waterproof neoprene suit ready to help him kind of with the elements. And neoprene is a synthetic polymer resembling rubber. So it's a really thick material. It's bulky. It's a stiff onesie, meaning that it's all in one piece, complete with hoods and boots. So, at the moment he knows that adrenaline is still keeping him going. That's what's keeping him warm. But, once the adrenaline calms down, he's going to need to stay warm. So that's why he puts that on. He's in an air bubble. The water, about 68 degrees, is now up to his chest. So on goes the suit. One cramping, chilled leg at a time. Ooh, imagine that. Water up to your chest at this point. At 8:23 p.m., moments after Kamprubi activated his emergency beacon, which contained both a radio transmitter and global positioning system, GPS, the Spanish Coast Guard detected it. So he's now activated his emergency beacon, which has got a radio transmitter, but also a GPS, which will state his location globally. But now the Spanish Coast Guard, they've got it. They've detected it. Immediately, an elaborate, tightly choreographed effort was put into action, complete with 2 rescue ships, 3 helicopters and 5 divers. It was black outside and dangerous. The question on everyone's mind: how could the vessel's lone occupant survive in such weather, no matter how experienced? So they kind of get out there immediately. And elaborate. If something is elaborate, it's almost over the top, tightly choreographed. And if we think of dancers that are going through a routine, if they are tightly choreographed, everything is in time, it's in order. So these guys, these coast guards, these rescue ships, the divers and the helicopters, they're all working together. But it's pitch black. It's dangerous. So the question on their minds, in such awful conditions, how can any man or anyone stay alive, no matter how experienced you are? We'll read on. At 9:26 p.m, one of the helicopter pilots spotted something white in the swirling, angry sea, the bottom of a sailboat that appeared to be missing its keel. One option, to secure the vessel with slings and hoist it onto one of the ships with a crane, was dismissed as foolhardy because of the winds and the danger it posed to Camprubi. Besides, no one knew what was happening inside. Okay, so they found some kind of ship upside down, which is one thing. It's one thing finding it, but then you've got to come up with a plan to try and retrieve it. They don't know the condition of Camprubi inside. They don't know the condition of the boat, whether he's okay. So, someone presented the option, well, let's sling it together and hoist it up with a crane. But then they consider this to be foolhardy. If something is foolhardy, it's reckless, it's bold, it's impulsive, and it's not going to work. And the wind is dangerous. It's a storm. So if you were to lift this boat up, what would happen in the wind? A diver was lowered by a cable onto the hull of the boat, tasked with checking for signs of life. He banged on the hull, shouting that help has arrived, but his words blew away with the wind. So now you've got somebody onto the hull of the boat. So they lowered a diver with a cable, banging on the boat. We're here to help. But the wind is literally just almost like stealing his words, making the situation even more difficult. Camprubi is finishing putting on the top part of his survival suit when he hears someone banging on the hull. Thump, thump, thump. He tries to hammer back, but his arms get entangled in the sleeves. "I'm here," he shouts. "I'm here." Then, nothing. Was he hurt? He curls up into a corner to wait, water sloshing and rising ever higher. His air bubble can't last forever. Oh, could you imagine the fear at this point? You know somebody's there, but you're banging. Please, I'm here. And I guess I was thinking when I was preparing this, maybe at that point he's wondering, am I just hearing things? Is there anybody actually outside? But he knows, time is limited. He can't be in here forever. That air bubble won't last, and also the water will keep increasing. Help will come, he silently recites. Help will come. Help will come. Still, a darker thought intrudes. Maybe I've been abandoned. To the rescuer's surprise and relief, they heard their sailor shouting back, but for everyone's safety, they put off any rescue attempts until the next morning, when calmer seas and daylight would prevail. The question was, would Camprubi still be alive when they came back? Time was not their ally. He could die from exposure, or he could drown, but they had no choice. So I guess this must have been quite a difficult decision to make at this point. But, in that kind of storm, in that wind, you're not going to be able to do anything. So they say, well, let's just monitor him. I guess they stayed as close as possible, and we'll wait till the morning when everything is calmer. But it uses a great word here, saying that time was not their ally. If something is an ally, you're working along with it. It's almost like a friend that you can work with. But time was not on their side at this point. But, they had no choice. This is all they could do. That evening, a representative from France's Ministry of Defence in Marseille phoned Virginie Philippe, but she assumed it was a telemarketer and didn't answer. When she checked her voicemail 15 minutes later, she heard a message telling her that Kamprubi's emergency beacon had been set off. Her world fell apart. Sorry if the wind's just picked up there a little bit. It's not been windy all week here, but for some reason right now, as I'm recording, the wind's decided to pick up, which is normally the case with these podcasts. Oh, there we go. It's died down. Okay, so then you've got this France Ministry of Defence that phones Marseille. In Marseille, he phones Kamprubi's partner, but she didn't answer. She assumed it was a telemarketer. Telemarketers are those ones that make those really annoying phone calls that you can't seem to get off, just trying to sell you something. But then she checked her voicemail later after not taking the call, and then she had that awful message which said her whole world fell apart, that Kamprubi emergency beacon had been set off. Could you imagine how she felt at that point? We'll continue reading. "Is Laurent okay?" she asked when she called back. "We don't know," came the reply. And so the waiting began. The couple's daughter, 12-year-old Jeanne, stayed beside her mum while their son, 3-month-old Paul, slept. Philip called Richard Satieu, Kamprubi's friend and sailing team manager, to see if he could find out what was happening. At midnight, she received an update from the organiser of the Route de Rhum. All he could tell her was the boat had capsized and the Spanish Coast Guard was involved. So it's just a waiting game for this poor family at this point. And the only information that the Spanish Coast that they can give is that the Spanish Coast Guard are involved. They're there trying to help them, but the boat has capsized. So at this point, they can't give any details of his condition, whether he's alive, whether he's injured, nothing. Again, try and picture yourself in those shoes. Try and really get the feeling of this story. Trying to tamp down her panic, Philip focused on being calm in front of her daughter, who eventually fell asleep. Unable to sleep herself, Philip watched the hands of the clock slowly crawl past 1, then 2, then 3, then 4 a.m. Just past 8 a.m., her phone rang again. It was the Ministry of Defence with bad news. The chance of finding him alive is practically 0. Awful. Of course, what can you do at this point? Both her daughters are asleep. Of course, she can't sleep. So just waiting hour after hour, slowly crawls past. And then she gets that call that we can't, the chances of us finding him is practically 0, meaning that there is no chance. It was time to tell Kamprubi's family. Philippe started by calling Kamprubi's brother, who assured her that Kamprubi was too stubborn to give up. So she calls Kamprubi's family, her brother, and her brother says, "No, Kamprubi's too stubborn to give up. I don't accept it. He'll still be alive." If you are stubborn with something, it means that you refuse to give in. If somebody is stubborn with their opinion, they're not going to change it. Kamprubi's brother continued, "He will fight to the end," he told Philippe. "Trust me. If anyone is going to survive something like this, it's him." What faith he has in his brother. On one level, Philippa agreed. Certainly, the man she had been with for 14 years lived large and took risks, but he'd never been one to panic when bad things happened. And right now, she had no choice but to have faith. We'll carry on reading at this point. In the cabin of the Jeanne, Kamprubi is disheartened and so tired. Water still seeping, sloshing and spraying has filled more space, shrinking his air bubble. The water is also mixed with gas from an engine he had on board for emergency use, which he never got a chance to use. Not only is the smell overwhelming, the gas stings his skin and has to keep his eyes shut tight to protect them. So you imagine what he's going through in that situation. You've got the petrol mixing with the water. Absolutely awful for him. Time means nothing now. Minutes and hours flowing into each other in a jumble. Maybe it's 2 a.m. He can't remember when he last ate or slept. So, for him, time just doesn't mean anything anymore. He has no idea what time it is. And I guess at the moment, it's irrelevant. But he says to himself, don't think about that. Focus. Don't fall asleep. He knows that the air bubble that's keeping him alive continues to shrink, and the water level has crept higher on his chest. With a grunt, he reaches out to grasp safety handles attached to the sides of the hull. He knows he needs to keep as much of himself out of the water as he can if he's to avoid hypothermia. So he knows things aren't good. The water level is increasing, but he also knows that he needs to keep his body as out of the water as much as possible so he doesn't get hypothermia, which is your body temperature getting too low. From time to time, Kamprubi tries to concentrate on listening for a sound, anything that signals the Coast Guard has not given up on him. But as the light gets stronger, there is only quiet and calm. So, he's thinking, just listening as carefully as he can for any kind of sound or anything like that. Images of his life crowd his mind. Not his life flashing before his eyes, but the things he will miss about his life. Things like conversations with his 3 adult children from his first marriage, and also what he won't get to be there for. Paul saying Papa for the first time and taking his first steps. Jean graduating from middle school. So it's interesting at this point that, when someone faces a life-threatening situation, sometimes you'll say, oh, my life flashed before my eyes, being very quick. But here it's not like that for him. He's just thinking about all the beautiful experiences that he's going to miss. By now, Kamprubi has been gripping the handles for hours, and he's exhausted. He lets go of them. He's floating on his back, arms, and legs splayed. But when the water laps over his face, he sputters and is alert again. And then he hears knocking. So he's gripping the handles for hours to stay above the water. He lets go of them. Now just floating on the boat. Maybe at this point he's kind of just starting to give up. But then he hears knocking. Just before 9 a.m., some 13 hours after Kamprubi's boat flipped, 2 divers made their way to the Xi'an. The seas had calmed, and their job was to secure the boat with 3 giant yellow buoys. The idea was to keep the boat afloat while the team conducted either a rescue or a salvage operation. So at this point now, they've got what they wanted. The sea has calmed, so it's not as rough, but all they need to do is secure the boat so it doesn't sink. So they attached basically 3 giant buoys, those big balls that you kind of get in the sea that don't sink, to keep the boat afloat. When it was secured, the divers knocked on the hull. They didn't expect to get a response, but they heard shouting. Against all odds, against the mercurial sea and wind that had toppled him over, Laurent Kamprubi was alive. Diving below the surface to peek into the cabin window, they saw his red booties moving. Again, I don't know why they call them booties. It must be like a nautical term, because I would just call them boots. I'm really not too sure why they do that. I'm going to have to look that up afterwards. So they knock on the boat. But, they're not expecting a response. They just assume that perhaps he's dead, passed out, or, they're not going to get a response. But they look through the cabin window and they see that he's alive. But wires and jagged pieces of broken wood and metal floated underneath the hull, blocking the divers' access to the cabin door. So they began the painstaking job of diving under again and again to clear a path. So they realise, that there's so many objects blocking the driver's door. So they begin the painstaking, difficult, timely job of going under, removing something away from the door, then repeating that process. It was slow, dangerous work with objects that could slice or snag them. Bit by bit, 1 hour flowing into a second hour, then a third, they collected and disposed, rising to the surface where the bag was full, then diving back down again. So these divers were making a risk in themselves, weren't they, in doing this? You have to stay alive, Kamprubi told himself. But he knew that now was not the time to start doubting his rescuers. As one of the helicopters positioned itself above the Sargavia, a bright orange, 130-foot tugboat, a diver knelt on top of the hull of the sailboat, explaining in shouts to Kamprubi what they needed him to do. Kamprubi learned there would be no helicopter to lift the Xi'an up because the vessel was already in pieces, that no divers would smash through the window to pluck him out because it wasn't big enough. Besides, water would rush in and pull him under. The only way out was through the door. So the divers shouting to Kamprubi, helicopter's not going to work. We can't do that. We can't smash through the window. You're going to have to go through the door. This is all on you. Surviving was up to him. Tired and chilled from so many hours of exposure, his muscles cramping, Kamprubi understood that surviving this was still up to him. Because as soon as a diver opened the door, he would have to swim out fast, with everything he had to avoid the torrent of seawater waiting on the other side to pin him down and drown him. He'd have one chance. So he realised this was all on him. As soon as that door opened, he had to swim fast, otherwise the water just rushing in would take him. The rescue began just after noon. Holding his breath, Kamprubi waited by the door, treading water, poised to break through when it opened. He forced himself to breathe slowly, calmly as he waited. And suddenly, the door opened. Acting on instinct, he was through it like a shot, swimming, using adrenaline and his arms and bicycle-hardened legs to power against the rush of water. So he's just waiting there, treading water, meaning that he's just kicking his legs, staying afloat, breathing calmly, relaxed. And then he acted on instinct as soon as that door opened, so it didn't take much thinking. It was an instinctive act. Threw it like a shot, quickly. He swam under the hole and then made a right turn to go up 6 feet to the surface. He broke through to the surface, gasping for air. A diver, the same one who had knocked on the hole that night before, was waiting to attach a harness so the helicopter could hoist him aboard. So he does it, swims under the boat, gets up, comes out of the water with them, gasps for air. Could you imagine that relief? The men embraced or hugged. "I was so afraid you wouldn't survive the night," the diver admitted. Kamprubi answered, "I was so afraid you wouldn't come back for me." When Kamprubi boarded the helicopter that would take him to a hospital in the nearby Spanish coastal city of A Coruña, his legs buckled as he bent over to catch his breath. It was 12:35 p.m., more than 16 hours since the Xi'an had capsized. Soon he'd be treated for exposure and hypothermia, and doctors would flush the gasoline out of his eyes. He would learn that he'd lost 15 pounds during those 16 hours, all of it muscle. But on the helicopter, none of that mattered. All he wanted was to talk to Philippe. When someone on board finally handed him a phone, neither of them could speak. They were both crying too hard. What an incredible story. So I guess at that point, once he reached the helicopter, all the adrenaline kind of came down and legs just gave way, arms gave way. He didn't need to fight anymore. He didn't need to keep on going. But what an incredible man. What incredible mental as well as physical strength, that perseverance just to keep fighting through that. And I guess the question we could take from this article is, would we have had the mental power to keep on fighting? I don't know. I guess you don't know until you've been in that kind of situation. And I do hope that none of you ever have. But just an incredible story. Absolutely brilliant. Yeah, and then, just imagine that moment when he spoke to his wife again. Felipe. I don't really know how you say that. But yeah, crying too hard, so they couldn't speak. So there you go. That is the story for today. And I hope you enjoyed that. I'm going to try and do a few more of this style of stories. If you like these survival stories, then I've got plenty more. But as I said, the idea of this is just to absorb the English language in a relaxed and natural way. So you will notice that as I go through these, I've not necessarily scripted all of my thoughts and opinions and definitions and whatever. I try to keep it as natural and authentic and as real as possible. And that is the purpose of this podcast. It's just to present the English in an honest and real way to you and to help you be able to speak it in a comfortable and natural way. But just as a note at this point, thank you so much for continuing to watch and enjoy my content. I honestly, genuinely really appreciate all of your support. For those watching on YouTube, for those listening on Spotify, it really does mean the world to me. Our little community is slowly growing. But if you've ever got any questions you would like me to answer in the podcasts, or any stories you would like me to read out, then just send them over. Send me an email, GSL-English1@gmail.com, or a direct message on Instagram @GSL_English. Yeah, just get involved. Say hi. And also, if you are interested in private lessons with me, I can send you all of the information. I do private lessons, group lessons, and speaking clubs, just where you get to practice speaking with a group of people and myself, and we talk about interesting topics. But remember, guys, learning English doesn't have to be stressful. Just enjoy it. Just keep going. Don't give up. And basically, watch my podcasts multiple times a day and your English will be incredible, and also it will make the algorithm like me a little bit more. So thank you so much for watching, for listening, and I'll see you all very soon. Have a good one, guys.